Okay, so let's dive in. Think about this for a second. Imagine, like, really stunning visuals, amazing music, all being created right there on the spot from just 64 kilobytes of data.
Yeah, I mean, just to give you an idea, that's smaller than a single photo you might take on your phone. It's kind of mind-blowing.
Totally. How can you possibly get such rich, complex stuff from basically nothing? It seems impossible.
And that's really what we want to get into today. It brings us to this fascinating world, the Demoscene. It's this whole computer subculture that's kind of built around exactly that challenge.
Pushing the limits with hardly any resources.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're leaning heavily on a CG World article, particularly the insights from Hosoda Ko. He's really helpful for getting your head around the Demoscene and this key idea of procedural technology.
Right, so the big questions are, how on earth do they squeeze so much out of so little data? The visuals, the audio.
And maybe even more surprising, how does this seemingly niche, almost underground thing connect to, like, the massive video games lots of people are playing right now?
Yeah, is there a connection? That's what we want to find out.
So yeah, we're going to try and unpack the secrets of the Demoscene and show how it's actually had this pretty surprising impact, maybe more than people realize.
Wow, okay. Sounds intense. Where do we even start? What is a demo in this whole Demoscene world?
Okay, so a demo, it's like a program, yeah. But its whole point is to generate visuals and music live.
Live, so it's not just playing back a video file or an MP3.
No, not at all. It's all driven by code in real time. It's this self-contained piece of digital art, really, showing off what you can do under some serious constraints.
Constraints seem key here.
Yeah.
And where does this happen? You mentioned a subculture. Are there, like, meetups?
Oh, yeah. The real heart of it is at Demo Party. Think of them as gatherings. Revision is a big famous one.
Right.
And people bring their demos, show them off, and compete. It's about technical skill, sure, but also very much about the artistry.
Competing under tight constraints. That sounds like a pressure cooker. And there's a specific category intro that pushes this even further.
Yeah, exactly. The intro category is where it gets really wild with the file size limits. We're talking like 4 kilobytes sometimes.
4?
Or the 64 kilobytes the article focuses on, which is still incredibly tiny. That limit, that restriction, it forces innovation. It's kind of the whole point.
64 kilobytes. I still can't quite wrap my head around that. What's the magic then? How do they do it?
Well, it comes down to, like, two main things according to the source. One is just superb programming, really clever coding.
Okay, makes sense.
And the other is this concept called procedural technology.
Procedural technology,
Yeah.
right. And that's different from the usual way of making games or graphics.
Totally different. Usually you'd have, files for your 3D models, files for textures, separate audio files, all taking up space.
Yeah, loads assets.
Procedural generation flips that. Instead of storing the thing, you store the recipe. The code itself contains the instructions for the computer to create the visuals, the sounds, everything on the fly.
Ah, like a recipe. A
Yeah.
tiny recipe for a massive, complex cake.
That's a good way to put it. A few lines of code can generate unbelievable complexity.
It's basically code magic. And this isn't just some obscure hobby anymore, is it? I heard it's getting wider recognition.
That's right. In Finland, the Demoscene has actually been recognized as a UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage.
Wow, UNESCO. Seriously?
Yeah. Which really highlights that it's seen as more than just technical skill, it's a legitimate form of cultural expression.
From underground scene to UNESCO heritage.
Yeah.
That's quite a journey.
And you mentioned connections to games earlier.
Yeah,
Does this procedural stuff actually get used in, like, big commercial games?
absolutely. And that's one of the most fascinating parts. These techniques, honed under extreme limitations, are now being adapted for large-scale game development.
How so?
Well, think about creating huge open-world, detailed environments. Doing that with traditional assets would require massive amounts of data and processing power. Procedural techniques allow developers to generate some of that detail programmatically, saving space and resources. So these tiny demos influenced huge games. It seems kind of backward.
It does, but it makes sense when you think about efficiency. The article gives some great examples. It mentions IQ, who worked at Pixar but came from the Demoscene.
Okay, so talent moves between those worlds.
But even more direct. Get this. DICE. the studio that makes the Battlefield series,
Yeah.
they actually originated from a demo group called the Xeric.
No way. Battlefield came out of the Demoscene. I had no idea.
Yeah, direct lineage. And Hosoda, the author of the article we're drawing from, he explicitly says he uses Demoscene techniques and that whole problem-solving mindset to optimize his mobile game development, making things run better on less powerful hardware.
It really is all connected then, this web of innovation driven by constraints.
Hmm.
Okay, let's talk specifics. The article mentions a demo called WORMHOLE,
Huh.
one at Tokyo Demo Fest 2018.
Right, Wormhole. Now, this one's interesting because it was actually made using Unity.
Unity, the game engine, so not one of the super tiny categories.
Exactly. No strict size limit like the intros.
Yeah.
The concept is moving through a wormhole visually, and the key tech behind its really striking look is called ray marching.
Ray marching. Okay, that sounds important. What is that exactly?
Okay, imagine your program is constantly asking for every point on the screen, how far is the nearest surface in this 3D space? Ray marching uses mathematical formulas, distance functions, to define the entire scene.
So instead of building a model out of polygons like usual.
Right. You don't usually have pre-made models. The distance function, the math formula itself, is the shape. The renderer calculates the distance and figures out what color that point should be.
Wait, so the math is the object. No modeling in the traditional sense.
Pretty much, yeah, for the ray-marched parts at least.
Okay, but then if it's all math, where does the art come in? Doesn't it just look like a formula?
That's the clever part. While you definitely need some math understanding, the artists control it by tweaking the parameters within those formulas.
Adjusting the numbers.
Yeah, changing values to sculpt the shapes, control the movement, define the textures. It's like, well, the article compares it to sculpting, but you're sculpting with equations, not clay.
Sculpting with equations. I like that. It really captures that blend of the technical and the artistic.
Definitely. And the Demoscene has historically been way ahead of the curve on graphics tech. The article points out Heaven 7, a demo from way back in 2000.
2000, okay.
It featured real-time ray tracing.
Real-time ray tracing in 2000. Seriously, that's way earlier than I thought that stuff became feasible.
Yeah, it tells you something about the innovation happening there, right? So back to Wormhole. Because it used Unity, it mixed ray marching with more standard polygon rendering. To make that work efficiently, they used deferred rendering.
Deferred rendering. Okay, another term. Break that down for us.
Think of it like prepping ingredients before cooking. Instead of figuring out all the lighting for each object as it's drawn, deferred rendering first creates a sort of snapshot of the scene's basic properties, color, depth, surface direction, and stores it in temporary buffers.
Buffers, like the G buffer mentioned.
Exactly. The G buffer is key here. It holds that intermediate information. Then, in a second pass, the system applies all the complex lighting calculations using the data in the G buffer. It's often more efficient for scenes with lots of lights.
Ah, okay. So it's an optimization strategy, especially for complex lighting.
Precisely. And Wormhole is a great example of how Demoscene principles optimization, clever techniques like ray marching, can be applied effectively even within a standard, powerful engine like Unity.
It's fascinating how they blend these different approaches. But okay, let's swing back to the other extreme. The real hardcore constraint stuff. That Revision 2020 winner.
Yes. The Japanese team, their first win at Revision, which is a huge deal. And this is where we get back to that mind-bending 64 kilobyte limit.
64K for everything visuals and music. How? Just how?
This is pure Demoscene artistry, or maybe artisanal coding is a better term. The visual quality is stunning for the size, but the music generation is equally ingenious.
How do they even do music in 64K? No space for audio files.
Exactly. They generate the sound waves directly using mathematical functions. They write code, often in the shader language GLSL. That takes time as an input variable and outputs the waveform sample by sample.
So the music is literally being calculated and generated live by the code.
Correct. No stored audio. The code is the synthesizer, essentially.
That's incredible and obvious you can't use Unity for something like that.
Oh, absolutely not. Way too big. For these 64K intros, you basically have to build your own custom engine from the ground up. Incredibly lightweight.
A whole custom engine in 64K.
And interestingly, this specific demo used WebGL.
WebGL, so it runs in a web browser.
Yep. Which makes it super accessible. You don't need to install anything special. Custom engine, browser compatible, stunning visuals and audio, all in 64 kilobytes. Yeah.
The optimization level is just staggering. And I heard they even did something tricky with the file itself, like hiding the code.
That's right. They used a compression technique conceptually similar to zlib, which is often used for PNG image compression, but they applied it to compress the actual program code.
So they compressed the code.
Yeah, and packed it all inside what looks like a standard PNG image file. It's a self-extracting executable hidden within an image. Utterly clever.
Like a magic trick, hiding the rabbit in plain sight. So visually, what's going on in this tiny marvel?
A key component is a fractal called the Mandelbox. It's this incredibly complex, intricate, self-similar 3D shape.
Another fractal. Like the Mandelbrot set, but 3D.
Sort of, yeah. And again, its definition comes from a distance function. That mathematical formula allows them to render these amazingly detailed scenes using ray marching techniques.
So like with Wormhole, the math defines the geometry. And I guess tweaking the math slightly creates different looks.
Exactly that. Tiny changes in the parameters of the Mandelbox formula can result in wildly different visuals, things that look like intricate metal structures, vast alien landscapes, glitchy cyberspace corridors. Amazing variety from tweaking just a few numbers.
The amount of visual bang for the data buck is just off the chart.
Totally. And they didn't stop there. They implemented PBR, physically based rendering, for more realistic lighting.
PBR. In 64K, how is that even... Okay, they keep breaking my assumptions.
Right. And the article mentions they used forward rendering for this one as opposed to deferred, and also procedurally generated planet terrain.
Planets too, how do they do that?
Using another type of fractal noise called FBM, fractal Brownian motion. It's known for creating natural-looking, irregular patterns.
Like mountains and valleys and stuff.
Exactly. And by messing with parameters like the scale of the height map, stretching the texture coordinates, using something called domain warping, they managed to create, I think it was 14 distinct variations of planet surfaces from that one core noise algorithm.
14 looks from one basic noise generator. It all comes back to that core idea. Immense complexity from very simple rules and minimal data.
It's incredibly elegant.
Yeah.
But it does raise a point. With everything being generated by algorithms, fractals, noise, doesn't it risk looking a bit too perfect, too mathematical or, computery?
That's a really good question. How do they avoid that synthetic look and get something that feels more organic or, well, artistic?
And that's where the human element, the artist's touch, is absolutely crucial. It's not just about letting the algorithm run wild.
So it's not fully automated?
No, not in terms of the final aesthetic. It's about the careful selection of algorithms, the precise artistic tweaking of the parameters, maybe layering different procedural techniques, introducing subtle, non-uniform changes. It's about guiding the procedural generation to achieve a specific artistic vision, rather than just accepting the raw output, injecting that human-like variation.
So it's a real dance between the power of the algorithm and the guiding hand of the artist.
Exactly. It's a different kind of artistry compared to traditional modeling or painting, but it's artistry nonetheless. So looking back at our deep dive today, the Demoscene really showcases this mastery of procedural technology.
Yeah, forced by those extreme constraints, especially the file size.
Right. They took limitations and turned them into a driving force for innovation, using techniques like ray marching, fractals, and procedural audio, almost like, magic wands made of code, to conjure these incredible worlds from almost nothing.
It's an amazing display of creativity and pure technical skill working together.
And the really important thing to take away, I think, is that this isn't just some historical curiosity or a niche hobby for hardcore coders.
Right. It has real-world relevance.
Absolutely. The techniques, the mindset, the focus on efficiency, these are things being adapted and used right now in mainstream game development and other software fields, contributing to those vast game worlds, realistic effects, smooth performance. It all has roots tracing back to this culture of constraint-driven innovation.
Seeing that direct line from tiny demos to massive games like Battlefield has been genuinely eye-opening.
It really reframes how you might think about where cutting-edge ideas come from.
Definitely. So as we wrap up this exploration of the Demoscene, here's something maybe for you, our listener, to chew on.
We've talked a lot about the constraint of file size, but what if we thought beyond that? What other kinds of extreme, maybe even seemingly arbitrary limitations could we deliberately impose today? Not just in software, but in any field art, science, design.
Yeah, what constraints could spark completely new ways of thinking or creating? It's a fascinating thought experiment.
And maybe on a more personal level, how can that core principle of the Demoscene, generating rich, complex, beautiful results from very simple rules or minimal input, how could that apply to challenges or projects in your own life, your work, your hobbies?
Using constraints not as barriers, but as catalysts.
Exactly. It's a powerful idea. Pondering that might just lead you to some unexpected and interesting places.